You don't know what'll happen tomorrow. Your freedom, confidence, security. Yesterday was certain, but now it's all vanished. Your normal world has shattered. Fear swallows you like a virus. Do not give in to it. Do not fall into despair. Even if the world will never be the same again, even if you cannot change anything, ask Jesus for help. He will protect you. He can give you the hope to overcome fear that no circumstance can take away. To find out how, send us a message.
I think this is a really bad idea.
All he's got is a donkey jawbone.
That he's already killed 600 of our guys with. Imagine if you had a dead elephant carcass over there, what he would have done.
It's one guy with great hair.
Maybe we should have all charged him at once, like I thought in the beginning, instead of tiny, small, defeatable groups. We're gonna have to climb a 10-foot pile of bodies just to get to him.
Are you coming with me or not?
At what point, I'm just saying, do you realize this guy's in the zone, we're not, and maybe it's his day to have the victory. Maybe we hang out here and just call it quits.
You're a Philistine soldier. Why don't you just act like it? Pull up your big boy loincloth and follow me to victory.
Okay.
I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is, you've been promoted. So congratulations.
That's great, but what happened to Captain Jar Jarza and Lieutenant Captain Hezekiah?
That's the bad news. You see, there's this guy Elijah I need to talk with. And I sent Jar Jarza and 50 men down to get him. And, well, they failed.
Failed? What do you mean they failed?
There was an incident, so I sent Captain Hezekiah and 50 men down to get Elijah, and he wasn't up to the task either.
Well, what happened?
Things just got a little heated.
Maybe I can debrief with them and we can devise a new strategy.
Look, they're all dead, okay? Elijah called fire down from heaven. They're all charcoal.
What?
But that's not the important thing right now. Let's stay focused on the headlines, which is you being promoted. That comes with a 10% raise, better benefits.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to check with the wife.
Bigger fields, matching 401 hay.
Like fire from heaven? Mm-hmm. Smoky people?
Okay, 2 giraffes.
Oh, duck.
No, honey, the ducks are already on board.
Never mind. There's the skunks. Kinda hoping they wouldn't get the message.
Whoa.
What?
He said 2 of every creature.
No, he's not talking about these. These are blood-sucking little monsters. No, he wouldn't put us on a boat for 40 days.
He is saving us from a worldwide flood. I think we can handle a few bug bites.
It's gonna be reflex. I'm gonna smack him. It's just gonna happen.
Then we need to bring extra.
I'm not gonna smack him.
Dad, the unicorn pooped in your room again.
No, that is it. I'm sorry. That is it. I have had it.
Welcome to Engage. Thanks for tuning again this week. You know, I was just thinking, you guys are all probably sitting right now in a comfortable chair or on your couch. Some of you may be even watching lying down on your bed. I don't know, but I bet you're pretty comfortable right now. And I bet most of us, as we've experienced church, even when we gather together, it's been a pretty comfortable experience. And you know, and I bet your experience is very similar to mine. It's comfortable. And I tell you this because I want to contrast our church experience today with the experience of Christians in the first century. It wasn't exactly comfortable. Let's enter into the world of the first century. I want to look at a story from the book of Acts. If you're new to the Bible, the book of Acts comes right after the gospel stories of Jesus. It's a record of what happened to the followers of Jesus after he returned to heaven. I mean, it's a wild story. We'll pick up in Acts 7. I mean, most of the early Christians were living in Jerusalem at a time. They had this amazing community as they followed the teachings and shared life together. Then it got ugly. You see, one of the Christians, a guy named Stephen, was debating the Jewish leaders about Jesus being the Messiah. The religious leaders got very upset what he was saying. So we're going to pick up this story in verse 54 of chapter 7. Listen as Emma reads this.
When the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Look, he said, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. At this they covered their ears and, yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. When he had said this, he fell asleep. Acts 7:54-59. On that day a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. Acts 8:1-3.
I mean, what must it have been like to be a Christian during this time of history? I mean, you might watch as a friend, someone you had been sharing life with is brutally murdered, and then the population rises up against you and the rest of the Christians. I mean, you are forced to flee your home, your job, and your family because the people of Jerusalem want to kill you. I mean, their experience of following Jesus was quite a bit different than ours today, right? We're comfortable. It feels safe and normal to go to church. For the Christians of the first century, church was it was really a life or death situation. Let's talk a little bit more about the persecution that broke out against the Christians. The Bible isn't the only place where we read about this. Historians outside the Bible also talked about the persecution of the early church. We are in the middle of a teaching series called Villains. And if you're wondering, the Roman emperors are the villains we're talking about today. The Romans ruled over most of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. In other words, everywhere that Christianity spread during the first few centuries after Jesus. Not all the Roman emperors were terrible and not all of them hated Christians, but between Jesus' death in the early 300s AD, most of them hated Christians and persecuted them. One of the worst was an emperor named Nero. He was a serious villain. When a fire destroyed part of Rome, he was falsely accused of Christians for starting the fire and murdered many of them. Here's what a Roman historical said about Nero during his persecution. It says, Nero falsely accused and executed with the most exquisite punishment those people called Christians. These early Christians were brutally executed, and perishing they were. Additionally, made into sports, they were killed by dogs by having hides of beasts attached to them, or they were nailed to a cross or set aflame. When the daylight passed away, they were used as nighttime lamps. I mean, can you imagine what it was like for the first Christians living under Nero? I mean, how terrifying. Another Roman emperor who persecuted Christians was named Trajan. I mean, he was the emperor during the early 100s. According to Roman history, thousands of Christians were killed every day during the certain points of Trajan's rule. Pliny, who was the governor in what is now northeast Turkey, wrote to Trajan about this persecution. Listen to this. He says, I interrogated to these as to whether they were Christians. Those who confessed, I interrogated a second and a third time, threatening them with punishment. Those who persisted, I ordered executed. Those who denied that they were or had been Christians, when they invoked the gods and words dictated by me, offered prayer and incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered to be brought for this purpose, together with statues of the gods. You see, Pliny wrote about torturing Christians so that they would deny Jesus. I mean, can you imagine living during these times? When the Roman emperors, the leaders, and the government that rules over you were trying to stamp out Christianity? Put yourself in the shoes of those early Christians. Imagine the anger. Imagine the rage. Imagine the overwhelming sense of injustice. The amazing thing is that they didn't fight back. Most of them didn't become embittered and hateful. How in the world did they do this? How did they keep themselves from hate and revenge? I mean, they suffered with dignity and grace and really transformed the world. This unexpected response of the early Christians is what I want to talk about and unpack, because their response to suffering and persecution changed the world. Jesus promised this. I mean, this is the thing I think early Christians expected to be treated like this. You see, Jesus promised them that it would be like this. In the Gospel of John, Jesus warned his disciples how it would be. Look what it says in John 15, verses 18 and 20.
If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. John 15:18.
I mean, Jesus said, look, if they hate me, they're going to hate you. If they persecute and kill me, they will do the same to you. I mean, Jesus was a suffering Messiah. So it makes sense that his followers would suffer as well, right? We need to understand that the early Christians weren't surprised by persecution. In the same way, those of us who are followers by Jesus today should not be surprised by mistreatment and trouble. Jesus suffered and was persecuted. The early Christians suffered and were persecuted. We should not be surprised if we experience suffering and persecution. Thankfully, we don't live in a society where being a Christian is physically dangerous. In America, we have religious freedom. So we probably won't be fed to the lions for following Jesus anytime soon. Let's be thankful for that. However, we are no strangers to suffering and trouble. It's important to understand that Jesus promises followers trouble. Following Jesus does not mean that difficulty and suffering will somehow evaporate from our lives. As a student who's attempting to follow Jesus, you can still expect to be mocked and even experience ridicule for choosing to follow God's guidelines for sexuality and purity. I mean, you'll be different from many of your peers. You'll stand out. And as a teenager, that isn't very fun. As a follower of Jesus, we should expect to experience trouble and suffering. Sometimes it's in that suffering that we really recognize what it means to follow Christ. Christ's followers still live in the real world, and we experience the same pain and suffering as everyone else. For example, being a Christian doesn't exempt any of us from the pain of losing a family member. It's overwhelming. Sometimes in the midst of suffering and trouble like this, we think, where is God? Why isn't he protecting us from this pain like this? It's important to remember that God never promised us a life free of trouble and suffering. We should expect it. For some of you, it's the pain of rejection. When you choose to follow Jesus, there are relationships in your life that change. Friends who don't want anything to do with Jesus will pull away from you as you focus on him. And you may choose to walk away from your entire friend group because they are running as fast as they could away from God. This really hurts. Sometimes following Jesus can feel terribly lonely. As a follower of Jesus, we should expect to experience trouble and suffering. Jesus experienced trouble and suffering. His early followers experienced trouble and suffering, and will experience troubling suffering as well. So here's the question. How did Christianity survive? I mean, you have the most powerful empire in the world against Christianity. The Jewish religious leaders in Jerusalem were against Christianity. There were only a few thousand Christians to begin with, And with the threat of persecution, including torture and death, why would anyone choose to join Christianity? Listen, not only did Christianity survive, it thrived. It exploded. Within 250 years, the majority of the people in the Roman Empire called themselves Christians. And in the middle of the 300s, Christianity was legalized, then made the official religion of the Roman Empire. How could that have possibly happened? It doesn't make any sense. Or does it? Christianity is all about Jesus, God's Son, sacrificing his life for us. That's what it's all about. He willingly suffered and died to open up a way for us back to God. That's the heart of the gospel message. This message was and is incredibly powerful. To the Romans, the gods were always angry. Jupiter and Neptune and the others were always upset about something and wrecking things. The crops, the peace, your health. It was a constant struggle to keep the gods happy. With Christianity, the message was revolutionary. Look, God's not angry. In fact, he loved you and sacrificed his life to restore you and end this broken planet. It was an incredible, compelling message. The early church was built on the message of living out of this sacrificial love. Sacrificial love that should be the defining mark of followers of Jesus. We serve, we give ourselves away, we love. That's what it means to follow Jesus. The way the early Christians willingly suffered, the way they continued to love and serve in the midst of persecution and won the hearts of their Roman neighbors, they couldn't understand love and strength of that magnitude. The early Christians were the ones who rescued the abandoned babies in Ephesus. They were the ones who stayed and cared for the plague victims in Antioch, where everyone else fled. The Romans couldn't help but ask, where do you get love like that? And the answer was, it comes from Jesus. Christianity couldn't be stopped because the message and the community were and are so incredibly powerful. One of Jesus' disciples, a guy named Peter, summed up the approach of the early Christians this way.
Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats, do not be frightened. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body but made alive in the spirit. 2 Peter 3:13-18.
You see, Peter and the early Christians understood that suffering for Jesus was an honor. They also understood that suffering was their greatest opportunity to share Jesus. You have a powerful voice where you are suffering. People are watching you. Every time a Christians experienced trouble and suffering in the first century, it was like they were on a stage with a captive audience, watching and listening to how they reacted. I imagine that many people came to faith in Jesus as they watched the followers of Jesus suffer with dignity and love. Christianity is built on sacrificial love. Let us bring these concepts closer to home. Let us talk about our own lives. We live in the United States where thankfully we experience freedom of religion. We won't be fed to lions or burned alive for believing in Jesus anytime soon. So how does this relate to you? Like the early Christians, trouble and suffering are our stage. I believe that trouble and suffering are still our greatest opportunity to share. You may not experience a religious persecution, but I know you will experience pain and disappointment. How you react in these moments, how you treat people, and the things you say are really your stage for sharing Jesus. Your friends know you are a Christian. They will watch you. As Peter said, always be prepared to give an answer. You may not lose all your friends because you are a Christian, but there will be people in your life who will mistreat you, who will say terrible things about you and betray you. Remember the tension the early Christians must have felt? They weren't superhumans. They experienced all the same emotions we do. When they were persecuted, I'm sure they felt anger and wanted to take revenge, but they didn't. They chose forgiveness because that's what Jesus taught them, and that's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So when you are mistreated, when you suffer in this way, these moments may be your greatest opportunity to share Jesus. Embrace the stage. The people around you will watch how you react. They will listen to what you say. Christianity is built on sacrificial love. The early Christians didn't just survive persecution, they thrived. The church, when it focuses on sacrificial love, cannot be stopped. What if we acted more like the early Christians? What if we chose to love and serve? What if we stopped caring about winning and being right and instead just loved people, especially when we are suffering or being mistreated? What would happen in our schools? What would happen in our families? What would happen in this city? Here's a couple questions for you to think about. Where in your life have you seen someone suffer well? Or where do you have an opportunity to love sacrificially this week? You know, as you go, may you choose to love this week. When you experience trouble and suffering, may you show the world what Jesus is like. I pray just that this week would just be many opportunities to show that great love. May you be like Jesus in every opportunity before you. During the times of suffering, during the times of persecution to you, may you love with dignity. May you show the heart of Jesus. I know it's going to be hard, you know, and I got to be honest with you, young people. I think you may experience more persecution and suffering than any generation before in the United States. So I think we need to be prepared. I think we need to have our hearts ready for what may happen in our lives. But I know this, I know one thing, God's going to be with you. He's going to protect you. He's going to give you the ability. He's going to give you the strength to get through anything that you will experience. But the impact is going to be how you react, how you respond. I believe as you respond in this sacrificial love, the lives around you, the people around you, those that you thought would never come to Jesus will be the ones that will be knocking at your door.